Sweet as we're back. Episode 14 of the Zero Powerlifting podcast. Today's podcast is inspired by the original Ben Walls. Shout out to Ben Walls, one of our Zero clients. He suggested the topic, if we could discuss mixing powerlifting with other sports. For example, can you progress your strength with something like distance running, swimming, martial arts, rock climbing? Is it possible? And if so, how do you modify your respective programs? What are your other considerations? I think this is a great question. Because it's a little bit different to say strength training programming for someone with another sporting pursuit. So I'll address the question first, and then depending on how long that takes, I might jump into that second topic as well. Is it possible to progress your strength while you're doing other sports? I would say absolutely yes. If I had a client that came to me and they're like, hey, I'm really interested in this sport, I'm doing this sport as well, doing multiple sports, which I do get quite frequently, and they want to do powerlifting, they want to progress their strength, the first thing that needs to be covered is talking about expectations when it comes to their progression. So let's say you are invested in another hobby sport, another sport that you enjoy, and you want to progress at, and now you want to do this other thing, powerlifting and increase your strength. The first thing that you have to consider is, am I able to put the time, the energy, and the effort into everything that is going to drive my progress in that sport? There's a difference between making progress and making the best progress possible. Like, progress exists on a scale. You can make a little bit or you can make a lot depending on what you're willing to do. And so if your finger is in multiple pies, it certainly doesn't mean that you can't make progress with everything. It just means that you need to have a realistic expectation around what that progress is going to look like. And so where the risk might run here is, like, if you get into powerlifting, say you come and train at a gym like Ground Zero, you're surrounded by people who are invested in the sport of powerlifting. You're surrounded by people who, if they're not invested in the sport of powerlifting, are heavily invested in strength training and watching their progress in strength training, measuring their progress with their strength. You're going to start to see people making progress around you. And when everyone's making progress around you, that becomes the norm, as in, like, the rate of progress that you see from people that you're surrounded by, or if you're not in a gym like this, from what you're watching on Instagram, becomes the net norm. And you start to compare yourself to that. So you start to expect that. If I'm not making that rate of progress, those three people all added 10 kilos to their bench in the last year. I've only added 2.5 kilos to my bench in the last year. Therefore, I'm lagging behind. I'm not making as much progress as I should. The amount of progress that you should make is the amount of progress that you should make. No one can tell you how much progress you should be making. All we can say is we're going to do the best job to make you move forward, to get you some progress. And if no progress is happening, there's something that needs to change. So if you are doing multiple sports, if you are involved in multiple endeavors, you have to have realistic expectations about what you're willing to commit to this process of building strength. And if you can't fully commit to what it's going to take, you have to be willing to accept that your rate of progress is going to be slower. When it comes to something like, for example, Ben threw out some like distance running or swimming or cardiovascular pursuits. A lot of people think that those two things clash, like getting really good at long distance running and being strong at the same time aren't going to work together. And to some element that is true. Like, if you're expecting to be a high level long distance runner and a high level powerlifter at the same time, you're probably going to be pretty bad at both. But when you're chasing these separate pursuits as well, it also means you're going to need to consider how you periodize what you're doing in either of those pursuits. So if your goal is to do something like a powerlifting comp and you're also training for a marathon, it would make sense to split those two things up. So say do your marathon in May and do your powerlifting comp in October. So you can deviate the training, the time spent training, towards which one is more important at any given time. It's going to be pretty hard for you to maximize your performance in either endeavor if they're happening at the same time. And that just becomes a case of time management. Maybe you don't have the choice. If you don't have the choice of how you split up when you need to be good at either of those pursuits, then again, it just comes back down to expectations. If you're going to do a marathon one weekend and a powerlifting comp the next weekend, just expect them both to kind of be affected by the training for the other. If that is the case, then it comes down to priorities as well. What is more important to you? because you're going to put more time and energy and effort into the thing that's more important to you. The tricky part about that, of course, is if you put more time and energy and effort into what's more important, the other thing falls behind. There is a chance that you lose interest in that thing because you're not making as much progress. So it is a great question. It is a great thing to consider. There's certainly no harm in being good at multiple things. There's certainly no reason why you can't do multiple sports and be making progress in all of them. It's just about having realistic expectations, about creating priorities around what you need to be good at and when you need to be good at those things, and be willing to step back from those other things when you don't need to be good at them. You can boil this down to something simpler, right? Like, a lot of powerlifters ask me, is it okay if I do cardio? Can I do some circuits? Can I do some HIIT training? Can I go for a run with my dog in the morning? It's like, absolutely, you can do all of that stuff. There's no problem. If anything, that stuff is really good. The first kind of questions the first kind of information I want to know is like, is this going to interfere with your training? Is it going to interfere with your ability to recover and perform? If it does, then it needs modification. Or, as we get closer to the pointy end of important powerlifting training, do we need to modify what you're doing outside of the powerlifting training to make sure the powerlifting stuff gets put to the front of the priority list so you can perform the best that you can perform? Which is really a minor inconvenience to stop pursuing your conditioning classes for 3 weeks while you're going through a powerlifting peak. It's not a great deal to ask, and there's certainly no reason why you can't keep that stuff up for most of your training life. It just becomes a question of what is the priority at any given time. When it comes to training for sports performance, strength training for sports performance, this is where the strength training aspect gets pulled back a little bit. It becomes more of a backseat item. The best way to look at strength training for sports performance, where the other sport is the key priority, a high-level rugby player, shot putter, volleyball player, swimmer, whatever it may be, that wants to do strength training to contribute to their performance in their sport. Now strength training is the accessory. In powerlifting, we got squats, and then we got leg press, we got lunges, we got leg extensions. They are the accessories. The whole strength training paradigm is now the accessory to the sport, and that changes the game a little bit. It also helps you understand things. What do you do with accessories? When you're further away from competition, you ramp them up. You go a bit harder, you add more of them in. When you're closer to competition, you tone them down. The intensity drops. You do less of them. You put less output into them. That's how strength training works for these people who are involved in sports performance. It's about turning it up and down when it counts. It's also about removing bias and focusing in on the attributes and the qualities that need to be developed in the gym. That means not having too much emphasis and energy put into like, how can I make this person match what they're doing in their sport in the gym? People don't need that. They're already doing it in their sport. Like, I don't need to think about, what does a butterfly swimmer need for their shoulders with the actions and the motions that they're going through in the pool, because they do that in the pool. If they just want to be stronger, I think, okay, how can I make this person stronger? I know how to do that because I'm a strength coach. That's what I'm going to do in the gym. I'm going to I'm going to divorce some of the ideas around what I think is really important for a powerlifter, because this person isn't a powerlifter. But I know basic strength programming. I know how to target certain muscle groups. I know how to make someone stronger. I know how to periodize programming. That's what I'm going to lean on. If you're a coach and you're going through this process, it makes it so much simpler to just look at it like that. You don't have to think outside the box too much. It becomes a little bit trickier where you get a lot of external influence, parents coming to you saying, look at this YouTube video. This is how they train in Ukraine. It's like, okay, well, it's not really how we need to train here. We're just trying to make them stronger for their sport. And, we can do that with these exercises. It's about understanding concept, because there are no absolutes when it comes to exercise selection. If someone just needs to be generally stronger, generally faster, more explosiveness, have a greater rate of force development, you can do that in a variety of different ways. There are no magical exercises that develop these things. I hope that answers your question, Ben. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Any more questions on any of this stuff, feel free to flick them through. Love talking about this stuff. Thank you, and catch you next time.